I can wait for Nicole. Okay, all set? All right. First of all, thank you all for coming here today, and I want to thank the legislators for coming here as well. Representative Claridis and I would like to just talk about a few things before we get into the meat of why we're here. What we're seeing really is a Democratic food fight at this point. We're seeing the Democratic legislators throwing food at the governor and the governor throwing it right back at the legislators. But the truth of the matter is that they wanted to tax groceries. And let's begin, it's a little dry toast, no pun intended, of how we got here, but let's be clear on how we got here. The law used to be that catering and eating establishments were required to charge a tax, a sales tax at 6.35%. And what was silent was supermarkets. And in the 90s and the 2000s, as supermarkets started to prepare food, as that was the trend, DRS issued a regulation. And the regulation it issued in 2002 said this: if a supermarket sells edible meals, if you would, they would be taxed just like restaurants. And they gave 6 or 7 examples of when you would tax and when you wouldn't tax. So if you got a food item and you went to the front by the cashier, no tax. But if there's a food court or you're eating it there, there's a tax. So that was covered in 2002 by regulations. So that's what the law was. What happened with this new bill is they took the word grocery store and they put it in statute next to the word catering and eating establishments. That changed the whole statute with respect to the sales tax. That's why when the DRS commissioner read it, he was reading the words as written. They're not ambiguous. There's no shades of gray in here. These are clear examples. When you look at the legislative intent, when I hear that talk about it, the legislative intent was to supersede the regulation that spoke about supermarkets in a particular scenario and say, we don't care about that regulation, we're putting it in statute, so it's all going to be taxed. That is the legislative history. That is what you're going to look at. And by the way, there is no legislative history in committee, on the Senate floor, or in the House that you could look to that would deviate from that rationale. You cannot fix this by 2, 3, 4, 5 people getting in the room and saying, ignore the words of a statute, listen to our press conference, because this is what we meant. The legislators on the Democratic side passed a budget that said you're taxing groceries absolute pure. Now, if they get it wrong, I get it. Then we got to go back into session and we have to fix it. But you can't say a wink and a nod that we're going to change it. Just think of the result. The DRS commissioner, very scholarly fellow, great education, government, came out, looked at it very objectively, and said, this is what you're going to tax. And then what we're going to let politicians in politics say, come on into the room, and I know that's what the words say, but we're getting killed out there politically. You need to change it to say something else. Do you realize how many rulings we get from Department of Public Health, DRS, DEP, that would put no security out there for folks to rely upon it, knowing it could be changed to the whim of politicians who put pressure on people? This commissioner did what was right. This commissioner read it the way it should be read. And there's no argument about that. That isn't what we meant. Let's go in a special session and let's fix this. Representative Claridis is going to tell you how we're going to get to that special session.
I am?
Yes,
I am. Thank you, Senator. You know, we've all been around here long enough, and we've gone through enough bills, enough policies, enough debates and conversations, agreements, disagreements, to understand that one of two things happens. You either put something in a bill, whether it be a budget or another bill, that you either didn't mean or you don't like the result. And unfortunately, in this situation, they wrote this bill in the budget. They wrote this budget bill. They voted affirmatively on this budget bill, and now they're shocked and appalled by what they wrote. And I would guess that if the public was not so outraged at what they're seeing and hearing, none of this would be happening. But the public is outraged because the public can't take it anymore. And the public is speaking. And that's why this is going on. We hear from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they're shocked at what the DRS commissioner and what DRS has interpreted. There are a lot of things that we put into budgets and bills that I will argue, and I think all of us will agree, might be vague, that need to be rewritten, that need to be maybe repealed and written again. This is not one of them. As Senator Fasano mentioned, it was very clear that throughout time, when prepared foods became much more common with our busy lives and our busy days and our busy jobs and families, that prepared foods were being sold in supermarkets and that they should be treated as such. That restaurants were paying that tax, they were preparing food, so supermarkets should also be paying that tax. As we've already mentioned, that is current law. What this bill did is it made it very clear by adding those two words, grocery store. It opened up a Pandora's box of all sorts of things to tax. And when the DRS commissioner, who is the governor's choice for commissioner, interpreted as such, they became amazed that this is what it is. So it was either done in a very negligent manner, which isn't good, or it was done intentionally. It's not DRS's fault. They interpreted language that was voted on and became law. And it is not true that we haven't increased tax rates in the state. By definition, by going from 6.35% to 7.35% is an increase in tax, not to mention any one of a number of things. I've never seen a group of people who wrote a bill, voted for the bill, and then were shocked at what it said in my life. So what we are proposing today, and we are asking members to do, is sign the petition to go into session to fix this. And the answer is not what we've heard from the administration and from the majority party. Oh, we can probably fix it on our own, and we can get this done ahead of time, maybe in the next week. I don't know what the fix is, because if they're not happy with DRS's interpretation, that is the actual language of the budget. So what will they fix? The only way to fix it is to go back into session and change it. Actually change it. It is not about, I don't like your interpretation, so just give me another one. This isn't pick and choose. This isn't a Chinese menu where you can pick the interpretation you like. The bill is what it is. The language is what it is, and that's what they intended. The governor said it. We needed more revenue, and we are going to get it this way. He said it directly. And then he decided a few days later that DRS needs to give him a new definition. The only true way to fix this is to go into special session, and we are asking every member of this legislature to sign the petition and bring it to the Secretary of State's office so we can do so.
The only other thing I want to add to all that is this. All of you know the issue with respect to the tip credit for waiters and waitresses. And if you recall, the argument has been that the Department of Labor way back when said, we're applying the 80-20 rule. And they put regulations, I should say, they put out guidelines of saying that if your waiter does 80% serving and 20% non-serving, you could pay tip credit. And restaurants all over this state relied upon that ruling. A lawyer challenged the ruling, and this legislators here, on both sides of the aisle, said, if people relied upon DOL, we need to protect DOL and the restaurants relied upon them, because the intent of that legislation that was passed and the intent of the guideline was to give guidance to the restaurants. So we changed the law in accordance with it, and the governor vetoed it, saying that isn't what the statute says. and it's retroactive. Therefore, we're not going to do it. This is the exact example. Just because this DRS commissioner is being told by the governor's office not to enforce the language, and just because the OPM commissioner is saying we're going to change the intent in respect of the language, and just because the governor's saying we didn't mean it so we got to change it, but we're not going to change the language, doesn't mean future DRS commissioners, future governors are not going to say no. The letter of the law is the letter of the law, just like this governor did to waiters and waitresses. You can't get it both ways. You can't argue the letter of the law is the letter of the law, and we're not going to go back and fix it because that was the letter of the law, and turn around and say, but in this case, we're going to ignore the letter of the law because I'm getting political heat. It's illogical. It is illogical. And it is scary. It is scary to think that the majority party can get behind closed doors and change the language by virtue of coming out saying the intent isn't what we meant.
You know, and just to add to that, we've heard some comments from our colleagues in the majority party and the governor's office talking about this is important to do. We need the revenue because we want to make sure restaurants are treated fairly. Now, I don't know where the confusion lies, but it's been very clear that prepared foods are already taxed in supermarkets. That is current law. That has been current law for many years. So there's confusion on their side in that regard. And to Len's point, in the summer, the governor vetoed a bill that would have actually helped restaurants. And most importantly, it would have helped workers. Okay, because people that work in restaurants, typically, restaurants and bars, are people that have second jobs, that need flexibility because they have children at home, single parents, single mothers. And what's going to happen if this continues is these restaurants are going to close, and those people will not be able to have those jobs any longer. They will not have that flexibility to raise their children on their own and in their own way. This is a workers' bill, and it should be acted on as soon as possible.
Is there any questions?
Yeah, if you guys are successful in petitioning for a special session and one is actually called, or if there's one called absent this effort, will Republicans vote to impose this tax? Will you vote to limit its reach, and in so doing, give Republican endorsement to this tax?
No, first of all, it's so much of a hypothetical because I don't know what their
Well,
language.
you guys are asking for a special session, so I'm basically asking you, if you succeed, will Republicans vote to a lawmaker to limit the scope of this tax, or will you guys all come in and vote against the legislation that limits
We
this
are not going to
tax?
vote to increase taxes because we think you don't need to increase taxes, period. So that's number one. But number two, the argument is they're not going to get away with this charade, which is to argue there is no grocery tax, but we have to go and fix it somehow, even though there isn't a grocery tax. So, Paul, we don't think you need this bill. We would rather them go into session and get rid of this portion of the budget in its entirety and leave it where grocery stores act like restaurants at 6.35 and restaurants get taxed at 6.35 current law, and they want to repeal the whole thing, we're with them. They put that up there, Paul. They got our support for that bill. If they want to change it to what they thought they were passing or arguably think they were passing, they got the votes to do it. But don't bellyache to me because you're getting heat and then argue, but I'm not going to go in. We're going to do it by some magical powers that you simply don't possess.
So are you using this as a way to get in there and raise so much heat that they'll get rid of this altogether? I mean, it sounds like you want that opening.
But Susan, if you take a step back, the original proposal of raising the restaurant tax 1%, we didn't support that in the first place, right? We didn't support that in the first place, so we certainly did not support any additional taxes. So what we want is to go into special session and just take this language out that opens up grocery stores and all the foods in it to this tax. And if they maintain it at the 1% increase on restaurant taxes, we wouldn't support that.
So what happens if in 2 weeks, I mean, let's be honest, there are other special sessions that have been called and you're still waiting for it. If it doesn't happen and you don't get that in 2 weeks, what happens then?
Let me tell you what's happening now. In all seriousness, and I think this is big news. It's just it stays on where. Stop and Shop, ShopRite, Big Y, and a host of others, all got to change their systems. Think about those of you who are familiar with computers, especially if you ever done a POS, point of sale system. You have to say 8-ounce lettuce, no tax 7.35. 10-ounce bag, we got to tax, we don't tax that. Ice cream, we tax at this ounce, we don't tax at that ounce. If you got to prepare food and you have a Coca-Cola, you have to charge 7.35 on that Coca-Cola. Think about and I know because I got a call from a manager at Stop and Shop, that the massive computer changes that are going on right now because they don't know what's going to happen on October 1st. That's number one. Number two, Representative Claridis and I, and there's others here, are lawyers. What, if you were advising Stop and Shop, what would you advise them? DRS commissioner says you have to tax all these grocery store items. Now, through political pressure, they're saying we didn't really mean that, even though the law says that. So as a lawyer, I would advise Stop and Shop, I guess if I was representing them, look, the law is the law. You roll the dice, because if they change these positions and someone decides to enforce the law, they could go back 6 years and collect all these taxes. So what do you, all this uncertainty because of this, so their argument not to go in special session, it's selfish. It's purely selfish. If you've got an answer, do it. If Commissioner, the OPM secretary and the commissioner are talking, they have a resolution, okay, then let's fix it. Governor could call us in 2 days. Let's go in and fix it. What's the harm? Why do we have to leave people with all this uncertainty? Taxpayers, grocery, the elderly, the liability. Just fix it. Somebody said to me, well, what they want to do is say it's going to be like this intent and we'll fix it during session. That's crazy talk.
Let me take you a step closer to that, though. Clearly, as an attorney, you would recommend that your client, if you're a supermarket, basically tax everything. Because remember, this is called a non-binding advisory opinion from DRS. But coming from a supermarket family, as my sister and I did, I've been thinking about this since it happened. And I've been thinking about what we would have done. And you would be so afraid that you could get audited, not just going forward, but as we mentioned, going backwards. I wouldn't take any chances. Nobody wants to mess with the revenue services, federal or state. And because they clearly don't know, and the legislature clearly doesn't know, and everything's so uncertain now, I would just tax everything. And that's going to hurt consumer, it's going to hurt the middle class, it's going to hurt everybody we talked about. The single parent, the elderly, everybody that lives hand to mouth, penny to penny. And that's the shame of this.
So did any Republicans see the word grocery tax then and think that it was a problem? How come we're just hearing about this now? Did it sneak by you guys during regular session?
And actually, Chris Davis, who I think is here, brought it up in the House chamber as an issue. I won't speak for him, but he did bring it up in the House as an issue when they're talking about the budget. We talked about collectively the taxes in the Senate, but I think Chris Davis gets a gold star for being the one who recognized it in the House.
It's a perfect example of how broken this system is. When we're passing the bill out of committee, we don't necessarily see all the language because they pass it under what's called S language, not available to us at the time that the committee votes on something. And then when it comes to the House floor, we get the document a few minutes before. So this is an example of how broken this system is. Because either they were sloppy, as Representative Claridis said, or their intention was clear and they wanted to try to sneak it past people. But we did bring it up. It was mentioned, and it's something that needs to be addressed immediately, and that's why we're standing here today calling for that special session.
And last thing, if I just want to go, don't forget the pretense if you look back. The pretense was this, and because you all wrote about it, we want to add 1% to restaurant bills because if you can afford a steak dinner for $100, I think the speaker might have said that, you can afford an extra $1 at the tax time. That's how it was sold. Now, whether that was a smoke screen, I don't know, and arguably, yeah, mea culpa, we could all dive through his documents every line, but that's how it was sold. I mean, even look at the testimony that appeared in front of the committee. Most people argued we don't want the 7% on our restaurant bills. So it was sold as all we're doing is taxing restaurants. We argued McDonald's and diners and things where other people go to get a meal, being elderly, it's gonna hurt them. But that's how it was sold, and I think people believe that's the way it was packaged.
So let's just say you go into special session, you get the word grocery store removed. Do you just call it a day, or do you replace that language with something? What does the new language look like to you?
If you get rid of the word grocery store, you go back to the regulations by DRS, which brings the parity between the restaurants and the grocery stores, and you're fine. And oh, by the way, there's no revenue change, because the revenue that's included in the OFA package was assuming the revenue for restaurant tax, that extra 1%. So it doesn't include this, because if you ask OFA, based upon an assumption which people can challenge, it's an $18.8 million impact in 20 and a $25 million additional revenue in the second year. So there is no economic impact if we go back to, quote unquote, their original bill, which is 1% on restaurants.
So I've gotten a flurry over the past few days from rank and file Democratic lawmakers saying, this was not our intention, and attaching the speaker's letter to that. What do you think your chances are of getting, and how many do you need in order to petition your way into special session?
You need 50% plus one in the House and 50% plus one in the Senate to get it there. And I think Representative Claris can speak for her caucus. I know her answer, but I'll let her say it. But in my caucus, we actually have all but one signed, and that person's coming in now. So we will have ours. So those Democrats who said this wasn't our intention, who said this is bad, I would think they'd be clamoring to sign this petition and get into session and fix it. So we're going to give them the out. And Representative Claris and I talked, because yesterday the governor said he didn't think he had to go into special session, and that's just really bad. That's not the way you do things.
When was the last time the legislature petitioned itself back in a special session?
I don't remember, Vinny, do you remember? We've tried to do it in previous years. I don't know when the last time, I can't recall when the last time it was successful. But I will tell you, since we can all read in your articles and on social media, day in and day out, how many Democrat legislators are appalled and shocked, including the Senate president, shocked that this is what DRS is interpreting, which we know in hindsight is actually what it said. They should all sign, and we should just call ourselves in.
Why wouldn't we go in? I just can't figure out. It's not like, It's not Christmas, it's not Thanksgiving. Everyone just got through summer break, school starting. Let's just go in. That's unfathomable. Paul, you had something.
And they can't have it both ways. See, that's the problem here. They can't go on social media and to the press and talk about how shocked and mortified they are and how they don't support this, and this is not what they voted for, and then not agree to special session. You cannot have it both ways. That makes them hypocrites. It's one or the other.
Okay. The Senate President, just checked my emails while we were listening to you guys. He is requesting that the DRS meet with the co-chairs of the Finance Committee to discuss the evolution of its position on this budget language. We think it is important that the committee better understand how this process broke down to the point that there may have been opinions not expressed at critical junctures in our deliberations. We think it is very important to gather this knowledge so that the situation can be prevented in the future.
So let's be clear what that says. We wrote language, which we had since day one, assist Vin Candelora on this, since January 1, and now they're going to sit down with DRS and try to figure out what they said when they wrote it? That is really odd. Number two, I notice how they say co-chairs, forget about the
Right,
Republicans.
I know, it's
They don't
left
mean
out
anything.
an entire group of people.
And number three, you gotta, thanks. And number three, October 1st is around the corner. We're gonna have meeting after meeting after meeting. Because they have no knowledge how business works, and because they have no knowledge of what they do actually affects human lives and people lives, They're not even thinking of what all these businesses are going through to try to comply on October 1st. Do you guys how many food items they have to make a judgment call? Is that 7% or is that not, 7.35%, or is that not taxed? Okay, stick that in the computer. That is an unbelievable task. And the small mom and pops have got to do the same thing. If I buy, and I never buy, ragu, if I were to buy ragu, that would be charged 7.35. But if I go to Nico's Deli on Orange Street, which has got great Italian food, and I buy their Nico sauce,
On Orange Street?
on Orange Street.
Paid for by Nico's Deli.
If I go to Nico's Deli and I buy the Nico Italian sauce, I get charged 7.35, but ragu I get no charge. What's the logic of that? So the point is that what you're talking about, Paul, is that the amount of computer technology that you have to go through has already started. They can't sit here and have all these meetings like a bureaucracy that they are and then say, well, it's too late, we'll do it next session. This is what they do. Well, I'll tell you what it says. What that statement says, absolutely, definitively, we want to tax groceries. Because a delay past October 1st is taxing groceries. They should be as outrageous as we are. Stop, go into session and say, we're going to fix this right here and now. This is saying, I want to tax groceries, but let me confuse the issues on how I'm helping the people, and I'm not really helping
Well,
them.
it's certain groceries, right?
Certain groceries.
And just, and there is something.
But because it says grocery store, it could be almost any grocery.
But, okay, so, but that's not what DRS pointed out, and you have both commended the DRS commissioner
Yep.
for his interpretation of this language. His interpretation is that it is limited.
No question about it.
Okay.
You can't buy a raw steak and eat that. So that is going to be a grocery. You can't buy, and survive. You can't buy a
We're
lot
not
of.
gonna have follow-up questions about whether you
Right.
can be arrested.
But I'm saying there are certain food items that are not, but there's an awful lot of food items that fall in these categories. And a judgment call is gonna be made. And the bottom line is, any prepared foods, any small containers that elderly get, I went shopping for my mom, any small containers they get, which is one portion, generally is gonna be taxed. That's enough that they should go in and fix this.
And you know,
But there is, you will acknowledge, there is some confusion that a regulatory agency can interpret. Because like what you just said about the small portions, absolutely, that's something nobody's gonna defend as a matter of public policy as a prepared meal simply because of the size of it. But is there not some confusion here that is susceptible, perhaps not going as far as what you guys say should be done by legislation, but there is some wiggle room
But
there?
here's the problem, okay? Once they put the words grocery store in that language, it opened up the Pandora's box. And yes, there is always room for interpretation in a regulatory way, and that's what DRS is doing. And I think they've done a good job in interpreting what the language said, but there was clearly a lot of guessing in regards to that. For example, 5 muffins is for personal consumption and 6 or more is not. I mean, how many of you go into the car and just eat 5 muffins at once? I mean, I guess somebody does, but you know, who's going to admit to that? So there's a lot of guessing in regards to that, and that's, I believe, what they wanted to happen. I believe when you put together, when you put grocery store in there, it opened up the entire world for DRS to have to interpret it, and their interpretation may be 5, yours may be 6, mine may be 4, and everybody's is different. But because it was so broad, and that's what they relied on when they wrote it, because they wanted the availability of another spigot of revenue as big as possible in this state to take from.
Will you have an amendment that just says, take out the words grocery store? Is it that simple? Are you saying you don't want anything else? I mean, frankly, look, if this does go to special session, is it that simple? And in your mind, problem solved?
Yes.
Literally?
Yeah.
Okay.
And is your call, a plain reading of your proposed call is quite limited for the purpose of enacting legislation related to the exemption from tax of prepared foods. There's always a concern when they come back, when you guys come back in special session as to what this can open the door to. So, would you state here today how you interpret this, how limited this is, that would not mean reopening the budget, it would not mean gut?
there would not be a chance of us to add to that call because they would just rule that it's not germane and they have the majority. So they have no fear that we're going to ambush them. They control both chambers, so that's not a fear for them.
And our intent has been very clear. Time is of the essence. October 1st is around the corner. Businesses and citizens, particularly the ones that really need the money and count their pennies, are going to be hurt and affected in a few short days.
Thank you. Oh,
Just
sorry,
real
Paul.
quick, do you think that Democrats, with the October 1st deadline looming, will be able to withstand the public and political pressure on them? Or do you, to do something, either repeal this tax or limit its scope legislatively?
Look, Paul,
I would
this
hope
is
so.
a very serious issue in our view that people are being unfairly taxed and it affects the elderly and the poor. As I told somebody, we're skiing downhill. People are very upset about this. We don't have to do much to get the people irate. They're already there. Doing nothing politically is almost good for us because they're going to be suffering while we keep talking about this. But that doesn't help people. We're statesmen first, and we need to correct that. That's why we're pushing this issue. We have to fix this. If we want to play politics, we'd sit back and say, they don't want to go into session. We're not going to waste our time. Let's not do this conference. Do whatever you want to do, and we'll play the politics on it. But real people are being hurt by this. And real people are going to be hurt, and they don't even know it's coming. So that's why we're so outraged about
There's
it.
plenty of politics in what we all do. This should not be one of them. This is actually hurting people, and we can see and feel where it's hurting people. And if they don't think the public outrage, if they think they can withstand that, well then good luck to them.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. So this is really cold. This was cold, and I was getting so hot that I kept putting my hand around it to calm me down. No, because I made it hot because my hand was hot. It makes me sick. It's